All right, guys, I have got a treat for you today. I have been blessed to be connected with Hondo Solomon, Brother Hondo Solomon. I have to tell you that early on in my journey to understanding polygyny, one of the influences that I had was a little book called The Polygamist Papers by Brother Hondo Solomon. And I have, I think I've given away a half a dozen of these. And then recently I was looking for and trying to find, and the old cover was jet black with nothing but, white letters, The Polygamist Papers. And I had to go order a new one, and it's got a new cover redesign. And this is a small book, but it is a weighty book. This thing it's worth its weight in gold in terms of wisdom, understanding, insight, and these sorts of things. So I'm going to go ahead and bring Brother Solomon in. He's backstage here. I'm going to bring him in so that we can have a conversation. I'm really, really looking forward to this. One of the things that I really want to do is to catch up with him, find out where he's been, what he's doing, have a conversation, compare notes. But especially as we get a little bit farther along, one of the things that he enlightened me on, especially early on in my journey, is economic or polygyny as a tool of economic warfare, something that I see the Most High using, or he used with great effect in building cold Israel. And so that's one of the things that we want to talk about is polygyny as economic warfare. But that's going to be a little bit later. We want to start by catching up with Brother Solomon. So hang on, let's bring him in.
Hello, greetings.
All right, Brother Solomon, how are you, my brother?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I hope everybody out there is doing well also. I appreciate you having me on.
Listen, I've wanted to have a conversation with you for probably 8 years.
Wow. Okay.
And only in the last couple of years has my YouTube channel kind of gotten some traction. I've done most everything in writing and that sort of thing. But recently through my Patreon, a brother named Elder Adhere said, "Hey, do you know Brother Hondo Solomon?" I said, "I'd love to talk to him, but I've never had a conversation." He said, "I can connect you." Man, I was excited. I can't tell you. I was really excited. So how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing very well. Things are going right these days. And I've been engaged in economic warfare for a very long time. So I'm glad that you brought that up because it's a very vast subject. And I found that I think it needed injection into this space that we call polygamy. So I think it gives us a very realistic outlook toward it. But hopefully we can go in on that and we can talk a little bit about that.
Oh, absolutely. Now I know that you are passionate about that, so I don't want to get you spooled up too quickly because I want to catch up on your background first.
Yeah, sure.
So first thing, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, sir. Go ahead. I'm here.
Yes. So tell me a little bit about how I'd love to hear the beginnings of how did you come to understanding and thinking about and processing polygyny?
All right, so this is a very involved question. So my father, and this is coming directly from my mother. So this is a primary source. My mother told me that when she married my father, he had multiple girlfriends already, and he still maintained those girlfriends while he was married to my mom. So they lived together, but he still had other women. And it's ironic, but one of his women actually was the one who gave me my name. She's the one who actually named me because I remember my mother wanted to name me one thing. My father said, let me think about that. And he ended up talking with one of his girlfriends. She said, I like this name. He said, you know what? Let's roll with that. He said, let's roll with that. So it's really ironic. So spiritually speaking, it started off like that. But my father, me having his DNA, I've always been naturally geared toward being a polygamist. So as I grew up in the Apostolic Pentecostal Church, which surprised a lot of people, but there were scattered here and there were polygamists in the Apostolic Pentecostal Church. So when my mom and my father, when they divorced when I was fairly young, about a year later, she met a man who was a prominent minister at a very prominent apostolic Pentecostal church that we attended. I mean, people knew who we were all over the world. So like this man had a wife and 7 children, and I knew his children. I was friends with his children. I knew his wife, and he started dating my mother. And polygamy was so entrenched in how I grew up that they never explained it to me. It was never, I didn't even know what polygamy was until I was probably 12, 13. I never heard the term. And it was just something I saw. He was an entrepreneur. He made good money. He had his house with his wife, his main wife, and we had our own place about 20 minutes away. So I grew up in Southeast Michigan in a place called, it was Pontiac, Holly, Michigan, and in Rochester Hills. I graduated from Rochester High School.
Okay.
And I ended up going to college with one of his daughters because they were together most of my upbringing. So I ended up seeing one of his daughters, not dating her, but I ended up seeing her one day when I was on campus, when I was a senior in college. And she called out to me, and I ran like 200 meters back. I was like, "Who is that?" Because I was sprinting across the campus one day, and we just kind of caught up. We hadn't seen each other in a few years, but my mom explained to me that later on, this is when I was in my 30s. She said, "I've always believed in polygamy." She said it's biblical. She said all the patriarchs had multiple wives. She said you don't see any monogamous among the patriarchs. And my mom was a biblicist, and then I began training under her tutelage. And then later I had Dr. Johnny James, the late Dr. Johnny James, who's called the Walking Bible. Y'all look him up. That was my elder teacher, Elder Willie Jacks, when I was in Atlanta. People like that were teaching me, and polygamy, I began studying it, and we're tracking into my 30s. Because when I was a teenager, there were girls around me, but before I started dating, before anything sexual occurred, it was just like women were around. So I actually learned about polygamy and maintaining a proper time frame, managing time with women, conversation with women, parlaying with the ladies. I learned that years before I actually started, I guess, getting into dating, getting into marriage, things like that. So I was learning it under a very natural construct. And once I got into my 30s, I remember, let's see, no, I'm sorry. I was 26, and I read a book by Dr. Laila Africa called African Holistic Health. And I read another one called Nutricide. And he kept talking about polygamy. And I also had a mentor who was a medical doctor in Atlanta. And every day he was talking about polygamy. He's like, when you become wealthy and you get your degrees, he said, nobody can tell you not to have multiple women. He said, you need to, he said, you can do it now. He said, but it's even ready to make all the money. And he was telling me this every single day, every single day. And at the time, I'm like, man, he talks about polygamy a lot. This is before I started studying it academically.
Right.
And then I started reading Dr. Layla Africa's works. And then I read Dr. Patricia Dixon Spears' work in
that's a good book.
Yes. I read the original edition in 2004, and I bought the second edition in the revised edition in 2009. That was the first book I actually read solely focused on polygamy. And what I found was that even though, of course, in Africa, you still have people practicing polygamy, I was like, let me see what I can do. So I started studying. Now, the last part of that journey, Brother Che and I, one of the good brothers who's, if you look at my videos on YouTube, the social and historical basis for polygamy, he's the one talking behind the camera. And he was teaching online at the time. He actually had a school online. And he said, hey man, I went to his house, visit him one day. He said, why don't we make some videos on polygamy? Because I had 5 girlfriends and he had 5 girlfriends. So at the time, I'm rough. It wasn't a biblical construct. There was no village. I was just, these girls like me. That's all I do.
See, you were doing better than I was at that point, because I couldn't decide on a girlfriend because there was always somebody else that I wanted to get to know and that kind of thing. And so for me, I didn't grow up with a polygyny background or an understanding of polygyny. I mean, I'd read scripture, but that was the old days, right?
Right. And that's what we're taught most of the time. And that's unfortunate because it ends up wasting a lot of time, energy, and money. So like once I got up on the whiteboard and I taught, he said, man, let's put this on YouTube. Let's see what happens. Put it on Facebook. I said, okay. We recorded almost 2 hours of footage. He chopped it up. So now you have only about 30. No, we recorded about 45 minutes or so. And I literally answered about 1,000. I had about 1,000 responses the first month I posted those videos. And he and I were like, because literally nobody on the internet was talking about polygamy every day.
Right.
Nobody.
Right.
So I said, you know what? I said, hey man, I think I'm gonna write a like a 20-page book like on polygamy, just to answer all these questions, because I didn't know that people had questions. It was normal to me. I'm like, I'm looking at guys like, wait a minute, you don't have two girlfriends? Like, I'm like, that's strange. Like, why do you only have one woman? And I wasn't saying it to deride monogamy, because I still support monogamy, but I thought it was strange that people had such a virulent attitude toward polygamy, because I saw it and I saw it worked. And once I started writing the book, it became bigger. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is going to end up being 400 or 500 pages. So it took me so long to do the research just for the polygamous papers, which was only 74 pages. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll put this book out, let people chew on that. And then I'll come back with a second book. And that book will be called Polygamy as Economic Warfare. That book will debut later this year. I've been saying that for years, but now I'm in a position where I can do it. So that's sort of the long and short of it. And now,
I've only been waiting for it ever since I got this, and I heard you saying it's coming. I'm like, come on, I want to see this. Good. Yeah. I look forward to specifically doing some conversation about polygyny as economic warfare. But you mentioned Dr. Patricia Dixon Spear, and that was another book that influenced me. The title alone is just such an impactful title. We want for our sisters what we want for ourselves.
Yes.
And, we hear about loving your neighbor as yourself, but it's very common in the monogamy only culture for women to love their sister until it looks like maybe there's a connection or a potential connection between the man she's guarding and holding and, in the corner, and then willing to throw the sister away. And so that the title itself was impactful, but that's a fantastic book as well.
I agree. And I had the pleasure of sitting with Dr. Dixon for a couple of hours. She was a professor there in Atlanta. And, I called her and said, hey, Dr. Dixon, this is Hondo Solomon. I wrote a book on polygamy, or I'm writing, at the time I was writing. I was like, I'm writing a book on polygamy. I've read your book. And I'm really excited because like she had already been doing the research for 30 years. She had already lived in these communities doing ethnographic research. She's an ethnographer, she always has been. And, even though she's a woman of small stature, she has a very powerful presence, and she's very feminine and very nice and kind. And, I asked if I could come see her at the school and sit down with her and either interview her or at least just get some wisdom from her. And she said, sure. And I was only about 15 minutes from the school. And I went up there and sat with her in the office. And she said, she said, I know something. She said, I think I've heard of you. I said, really? I'm like, at the time, I'm like, I'm excited. I'm excited that she's heard of me. And, we walked around. She had a class, so I walked with her to her class, and she was she was kind enough to entertain me for that period of time, and really drop some jewels on what she knew, and trying to giving her critique of because she had actually said, oh, I remember you said this. I remember you said this, and she was critiquing what I had said. So I listened carefully. Yeah. It was powerful, but she's a very, very nice woman.
So this. I get the sense that the message is finally beginning to gain traction, but for a long time you're right, it was a very small community. So while we may hold, I hold you in very high regard.
I appreciate
that. It's a small enough community that you look back and there are a few people that about each other, maybe not necessarily make that connection. Certainly glad to connect with you today.
Yes, likewise. I told you, off camera, I heard of you as well. I heard of you years ago, and I was so busy working, I didn't have time to really get in touch with people. But I've spoken with Don Milton too, who's also another scholar on this subject, and Edward King. If you ever spoke with Edward King, Edward King goes way back to the
That's
90s.
a name I'm not familiar with. Now I'm familiar with Don Milton, and I'm hoping to catch up with him in the very near future for
Yes,
a recording as well.
yes,
You said Edward King.
yes. Mr. Edward King. Now he, I've been trying to get him to publish his book on polygamy for years. He also specializes in specifically the European Christian perspective.
Right.
He includes some other cultures in there, but he primarily specialized in that. But he's been in the game. He was on forums. I've seen some of his work and had it printed out from literally 1995 when the early forums. He was on there burning it up. I mean, he's written probably 1,000 or more pages on polygamy just on the internet.
Wow. I
Very,
would.
very,
I need to
very,
find his, or I need to connect, not necessarily connect with him, but I would love to see the resource. And we'll get to that here in a few minutes, just
yeah,
because.
yeah. He's on Facebook, by the way.
Is
You
he
can
okay?
find him on Facebook. Edward King.
I'm not. I'm not. I avoid Facebook like the plague. My
Yeah.
son is on Facebook, and he's forever getting it, asking me, "Dad, do you know so and so, or do you know so and so?" I said, "Yeah, sure. Why?" He says, "Well, they tried to get a friend request, and so everybody connects with my son, and then he ends up filtering it for me." Um, but yeah, the specific interest in talking to him would be your comment there that he specializes in European polygamy or polygyny, uh,
Mhm.
because when we get to the segment here where we talk about polygyny as economic warfare, polygamy as economic warfare, one of the things I found that was fascinating to me in my research, and I don't want to open the can too soon because I still want to hear about what you're doing in the Philippines and some of
Sure.
your international travel and business and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But one of the things that I found that we surely need to discuss is that monogamy only actually comes out of the Greco-Roman Empire from Numa's law about 700 BCE. And Aristotle tells us in 325, 365 BCE, 325, 360 years before um, Yeshua, Jesus, that monogamy is the foundation of the polis. It's the foundation of the state or
Mhm.
the city state.
Mhm.
And the reason the state pushes monogamy is because it offers them control. Where
Yes. Yeah.
as we're going to discuss economic warfare,
Mhm.
polygyny gives the man the power to build a wealth and power block and power base.
That
So
that's that's absolutely correct. That whole idea is the basis of my work. In fact, I was raised in a military family. I was raised by 9 combat veterans, so
okay,
I was with them almost every day. So I have that outlook. That's one reason why people say, "Well, Hondo's so mean when he teaches." I'm like, no, I'm just serious about it because people's lives are at stake, literally.
yes, yes,
Like you can live or die or extend your life based on what we're talking about. Uh,
yes,
and just to add to your wisdom about the Greco-Roman laws. So Roman law, they allowed at some point, this is at some point during their empire and the republic, they allowed for a man to have, of course, they were practicing homosexuality as well. They allowed a man to have, let's say, a concubine. You could actually have a concubine,
right, right,
but that was later. That wasn't like in the beginning when they during the rise of
right.
power. They was later addition. But also, and I'm as far as I know, I'm the only person who has this particular theory on economic warfare, or specifically in relation to polygamy. But the source of prescriptive monogamy, which means is forcible on an entire population. Prescriptive monogamy actually began with certain of the white European nations who installed it into the structure of the colonies and among their own people. Just for example, it was specifically, and again, this is just through my primary research.
Yeah.
You had the English, you had the Spanish, the Dutch, the Portuguese, the
Hmm.
French, the
Hmm.
Italians.
Hmm.
Specifically, those groups
Right.
were the ones who installed prescriptive monogamy because and now when I was a golf caddy for 25 years, I ended up caddying, this is about 5 years ago. I'm sorry, this was 10 years ago. I caddied for a former Marine tank commander. And
Hmm.
I asked him a question about my theory because I was formulating the theory at the time. I said, do you think that when you attack a nation, and because he had combat experience, so he had occupied before.
Sure.
I said, when you attack a nation, once you actually subdue the populace, do you think that long term, into like I guess multi-generationally speaking, do you think it's more effective to install religious leaders or to change the marriage customs? Now, my theory focuses on the latter. He said, "Oh, he said the marriage customs." He said, "We could just shut you down by just changing your marriage customs."
Right.
I said,
Interesting.
I said, ah. See, so I started to
Yeah.
ask people who are out in the economy, who are part of certain members of society who had an impact on other societies. And remember, these are billionaires and multimillionaires that I'm talking with. A
Yeah.
lot of them confirmed what I was saying. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go further, give you receipts. I caddied for one of the Rothschilds. Now, those of you who are unaware, the Rothschilds are the wealthiest European family on the planet.
Hmm.
Okay, they're trillionaires, not billionaires.
Right.
So I caddied for one of the Rothschilds one day, and we were walking up the seventh green at this golf course, and he was rubbing his chin, and he looks at me. He says, "Man, I've never heard anybody talk about polygamy like this." He said, "But everything that you said about the wealthy families having a painting or a photo above the mantle with the man and his primary wife is correct." He said, "You were also correct about the man having a mistress and then sending the children out with trust funds intact,
Right.
or commissioning them to go to different nations, just like Amstel Rothschild did." He said, "You're the only person in the world I've ever spoken with who knew that about wealthy families and actually understood how it worked and why it works." And
Right.
then I saw him again, and he said, "How's the publishing business going?" He said, "You know what?" He said, "That's fascinating what you're teaching." He said,
Right.
"Because everything is right." He said, "That's what wealthy people do." Because I was talking about this for 2 hours with him up to that point.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
economic warfare gets heavy, but I can define it though later once we.
Yeah. We'll do that. And I would say certainly that. Let me give you a little bit of background that I know from study. There's a really good book by John Witt Jr. titled "The Western Case for Monogamy over Polygamy."
Yes, I've heard
And
of
so he wrote for Cambridge, the Cambridge Studies in Law and Christianity.
it. Mhm.
And he's obviously coming from a monogamy only mindset, but ultimately the conclusion or the statement that he makes, or the statement that the book makes, the larger thought process is that you can't make the case for monogamy from scripture alone. You have to do it using Western law, and primarily have to use that starting in Greco-Roman law. And so
Mhm.
he would trace even what you find in the monogamy only teachings of the European nations. He would trace that back into Numa's law with Greece and Rome, because you're correct that they were allowed to have concubines, but a concubine could not produce a heritable offspring. So the
Yeah.
only way to have a heritable offspring was a monogamous marriage, but they allowed you to divorce and remarry, divorce and remarry. They allowed sex with slaves. They allowed sex with
Mhm.
children. They allowed homosexuality, temple prostitution, the whole nine yards. It was completely debauched, which
Yes.
is what happens in a monogamy only society over time. Is it leads to debauchery because of the imbalance between male and female. There are
Mhm.
always more women than men, which ultimately
Yeah.
leads to promiscuity. And so you know all these things. Um, but something that maybe we could talk about as well. I don't know if you're familiar with some of the writings about um, the Celts, because the Celtic culture was very much a
Yes.
polygynous culture.
Yes, yes, as were the Gauls and the Franks of Germany.
Right.
Uh, in fact, the Celts had the Brecon laws. They're called the Brecon laws.
Mhm.
And I actually spoke with an Irishman, and he actually broke this down for me.
Right.
He said, "No, man." He said, we definitely had polygamy. So,
Yeah.
and as did the Polish. The Polish actually
Mhm.
were also polygamous. In fact, every European society I've ever studied, going back about 2,500 years, had polygamy. Every single one.
Right. And so my argument would be certainly changing the marriage laws over the religious, but I would say that it's ultimately the Roman Catholic Church and the religion, the Roman Catholic influence, where the church fathers brought in from Greco-Roman law this monogamy only ideal. You see that with Tertullian. You see that with Chrysostom and Justin Martyr. No, trying to remember some of the church fathers. But the bottom line is they imported monogamy only, but the Roman Catholic Church would be the primary spreader of that through the European cultures when they took over the Celts, took over the Gauls, took over all these other cultures, and then ruled from the pulpit.
Yes, and ironically, the Catholic Church specifically has always been against the populace, because the populace was practicing indigenous religion. They're practicing indigenous culture in general, because religions are part of a culture. They don't create the culture. So the indigenous societies that were surrounding the edifices were always practicing the tribal customs, which included polygamy. So excuse me, if you read a book called the Liptera is in 3 volumes. Yes, Mark Madden. So you know that there was a debate for several hundred years about polygamy among churchmen, both Protestant and Catholic. Now, what's also interesting is that the Christian world, up until
keep talking.
Sure. The Christian world up until the mid 18th century, the entire most of the Christian world was still polygamous. See, and people were practicing this. And it was a threat to the church, because once you multiply, and this goes back to the first biblical instruction that we find, to be fruitful and multiply. That was the very first, and I call that the prime directive. I actually calls it in my next book called Polygamy as Economic Warfare. I call that the prime directive of humanity is to be fruitful and multiply.
Right.
And also, by extension, when you're reading it, it means to spread out. So when we live on top of each other, skyscrapers, and we don't have any land.
And have dominion, yes.
You don't have any dominion. And that's one reason why people in cities are easily controlled. When you go down to the countryside, they're harder to harangue. If you even watch Hollywood films and other films outside of the Hollywood sphere, whenever you have one country attacking another, the first place they go is to the city. They go because them folks in the city don't have guns. Those folks in the city, they haven't corralled, but those folks in those towns, they know each other. And they're like, hey man, if something pops off, hey, that back trail to take. They think, because a lot of military type of people and hunters move to the countryside. So this is part of economic warfare, and which includes sex, which includes religion, is society, and that's how you relate to other people. It includes politics, which is how you reflect your values to the outside world and your image to the outside world. It includes combat. It includes the esprit de corps of the family, or the spirituality of the family. That's your entire value system and how you interact with each other. You've got commerce, which is broken up into industry and finance, because commerce is the whole aspect of trade within your family, your clan, your tribe, and going out.
Right.
And industry is what you create. That's your material and your intellectual property, what you create from those two aspects. And then you go into finance, which is how your money becomes currency, because money and currency are two different things. The currency is your precious metals. That's your investments. That's how you move things around. And that would be commerce. So those are the aspects of economic warfare that I actually instill. And those of you who have seen my work, you know that I'm talking about all these things all the time. And as well as economic warfare strategies for the family. For example, some people, for example, can use contracts to marry the women. These are all things that we can just,
Yeah. No. We're going to get to more of this here in a minute. I stepped away real quick because I wanted to grab a couple titles. I know we're talking about some different books, and I want people to see what the book looks like so they can go hunting for it on Amazon. This may be an older cover, but this is Dr. Patricia Dixon Spears, We Want for Our Sisters What We Want for Ourselves. Highly recommended.
Yes.
course, I already mentioned Brother Hondo's The Polygamous Papers, and this is also available on Amazon. Highly recommended. It's a small book worth its weight in gold. You just mentioned Dr. Martin Madden's Theliaphthora, okay, or different people pronounce it differently, and I think my camera is backwards, so you'll have to read left
Oh
or
no,
right.
it's coming up just fine. Yeah, we can
Oh,
see.
is it for me? It looks backwards here, but for people who are looking for this, but this particular cover, you'll find it's the first volume of a 3-volume set, and the first volume is the most important, but there are actually 3 in the set. And this particular one was edited and republished by Don Milton. We were talking about him just a little bit ago, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Another one you haven't mentioned, but I bet you're familiar with this.
Yes.
Man and Woman in Biblical Law by Tom Shipley, right?
Yes.
Another fantastic book worth its weight in gold. And I want to, I'll in just a second, I'm going to grab another because I thought it was on my shelf here, but I think it's sitting on the kitchen table. I've got a whole shelf. You probably do too. I've got a whole bookshelf of nothing but books that I've collected connected to polygyny or marriage and marriage structure, that kind of thing.
Well, I want to throw this out there about books. So resources for those of you who want to study this subject more. If you can find books printed about polygamy from various African men, you will find those are some of the best books on the subject that you will find. I've read some very rare and out of print books written by African men that I found on some bookshelf in a theological center, some random school and in some theological college. It's the rare and out of print books that are about polygamy. Those are worth finding.
And I found early on in my research, I found a little thin book that was a master's thesis by Lauren Heiligenthal. It's on my shelf over there somewhere. I'm not going to go look for it, but essentially talking about how Western Christianity damaged or even destroyed. We really need to repent for this. Destroyed the economy and the cultures of Africa when we went in with a monogamy only and enforced monogamy only culture and told men they had to send away, wives if they wanted to get baptized and so on and so forth, which is utter falsehood. It's a complete rejection of what Scripture actually says. And for me, early on, I read that book and it just broke my heart because I realized how it was through that and also through Dr. Dixon Spears' book that I realized how damaging monogamy only is to women, and how damaging that concept is to families and being able to build patriarchal families and patriarchal structures. Ultimately, we see today, the ongoing outworking of that is a destruction of masculinity, because it takes away and emasculates a man by restraining him from being able to do what he was created to do, and that's to be fruitful, multiply, and have dominion. Right?
That's correct. As a matter of fact, if we can be a bit more forceful about it, the fact is when people do that and they suggest that you have to, get rid of any of your wives, you're now stepping in the place of the Almighty, and you are breaking the first divine law, the prime directive. You're actually breaking that law, and and that's one reason I believe that across the African continent there's been so much weakness in the economy, because now you have other nations starting to return. Now you have Asian nations coming in to return and do what white nations were doing, and now they're destroying their economy and they're turning it over. So Asian societies, specifically the Chinese right now, are going to do the same thing, but they're a lot more slick with it. They're actually engaging in full scale economic warfare is a much deeper level. And then you get into the occult and things like that. Like the Chinese have a long occult, like the dark arts, not just symbolism, but they have a long history of utilizing the dark arts, which is what they're using. They're using specifically blood rituals to take over these other nations. But that's of course, that's a whole other.
Yeah, that heads into a whole nother area. So Okay, so one of the book I wanted to mention, I already mentioned this, but I just want to put it up here for those who are interested. The Western Case for Monogamy over Polygyny by John Witt Jr. And that is it's actually a green title at the top, so you can't see it. Cambridge Studies in Law and Christianity, and he did that, wrote that for Cambridge. And what's really cool about that book is that he's actually a contrarian. He's promoting monogamy, but he makes the case, he demonstrates that the case can't be made for monogamy on scripture alone, that it has to be done using Western law, or particularly the law that comes out of Greco-Romanism, and then was really sharpened up in the Western European nations, primarily through the Catholic Church and Council of Trent and some of the things prior to that. And their purpose, just as you have sort of explained, their purpose is controlling man, and ultimately being able to maintain allegiance to the state instead of men having the ability to build family, clan, and tribe. So let's do this. Go ahead.
I was going to say, so the two pillars that control the earth, and I use what I call the heaven and earth concept. There's the spirit realm. There's what happens on the earth. Remember, Yeshua, Eshu, if you speak Aramaic, he said that, what occurs in the heavens will occur on the earth. So there's always a mirror. What we do here is a mirror of what's happening above us.
Right.
And sex and mathematics are the two things that govern the entire universe. Mathematics governs the planet, sex governs the rest of the universe. So I'm sorry, it's the other way around. Mathematics governs the heavens, and then sex is what controls everything here. That's how everything produces: plants, animals, us. So once you control a man's progeny, his ability to produce, then you have already destroyed. You're talking about potentially thousands of generations of people just from one man. Remember, that's one man and one woman. So you've essentially destroyed the ability to even start off building a power block. That's one reason why they start poisoning our soil. They poison the air, they poison the water. These are elite families that are doing this. Not every elite family, but there are some that are specifically doing this. And once you start poisoning the source of your genetic material, then you've automatically killed that. Now, when the person is conscious and aware of what's going on in his surroundings, as a man matures and he tries to build via economic warfare, he's trying to build a family trust. He's trying to build his body, his mind, staying in shape, going to buy some land, going to grow crops, anything having to do with his wealth development and his personal development, then you're not going to be able to even build a family. The man gets frustrated. He starts to talk about red pill doctrine and MRA doctrine, and it's all of this stuff going on. You have passport bros because of this. When anciently, men have always traveled to other lands, and in political structures have always traveled to other lands via warfare, trade, and political marriages. Every marriage, because it's like if you look up Wild Wolf is one of my elder brothers. He also teaches on polygyny. He says marriage is combat. I have to agree. He said mating and marriage is combat because you're constantly fighting through all of these fences in order to go get you a wife. And people now, I tell people now, if it was easy for you to get that particular woman, then that's not real. If you just walked up and you just started mating with, no.
Right. Yeah.
You had to fight sometime to go get a wife. You literally had to fight her brother to go get, like if you can't beat my brother in combat, you can't have me. Men would get told that in these mating rituals sometimes. It just depends on what culture you went to. And destroying the ability of the man to even want to fight. His fighting spirit is gone.
Right.
The will to not live. That's why you see a rise in male suicides. You see there's been a sharp rise even overseas in India. That's why there's a men's rights movement in India right now. A lot of those men have been deleting themselves due to economic war. Their own government is attempting to destroy the populace, when if it was a true Hindu society was family-based.
Right.
You read the Mahabharata, which is the entire collection of Hindu history. Okay, some people focus on a few books, but this is thousands of books. All they talk about is mating in every book. They're talking about this deity did this, and the deities, by the way, in every culture, for those who don't know, are always based on real ancient people did these exploits.
Right.
Okay, whether you're talking about Nimrod, whether you're talking about Zeus, whether you're talking about all these are all based on some person who lived and did great exploits. Remember, people were giants, people would live longer, people were
Mhm.
living for 1,000 or more
Yeah.
years, like Methuselah, on and on and on. But they had systems set up to continue their line. Now, once these families anciently began to be formed, they said, well, wait a minute, if we let the populace do what they want and build, they can overtake us. So it's a
Right.
constant form of combat. And that's
Right.
why then they create armies, their own armies. By the way, armies all started off as clans and tribes who are banding together to fight other clans and tribes. This is everything you see in the world today is based on a family system. And that's why I
Right.
always say
Right.
the man, it starts with the man, then he builds the family, then that family forms with like other relatives. That's a
Mhm.
clan. When
Right.
different clans from different families come together, that's a tribe,
Right.
and then you form a nation. So I
Right.
just
And but again, for me, from my perspective, and I think we share much, if not all of this perspective, but my perspective is that the Most High tells us what the best way to do things is. And
yes,
his plan, his structure is the best way to do things.
yes,
So if we go all the way back to the beginning, he said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. The challenge with those who want to control population growth is they assume that there's a shortage mentality. And so
mhm,
they want to control growth instead of the Most High. If the Most High's commandment is be fruitful and multiply, and he's never rescinded that commandment, we should assume that he knew what he was doing when he said, be fruitful and multiply. And then when we look at how he chose to build Israel, he built Israel, Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to
mhm.
Abraham, Isaac, Yaakov. When he got to Yaakov, it was we look at that, and he was the Most High was intentional in creating the circumstances and controlling the circumstances so that Yaakov had four wives for the purpose of building Israel and establishing a family that grows as a clan and then becomes tribes that ultimately is we commonly think of it as a nation, but it's not. It's a family that's very large.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. And see, the Almighty only deals in abundance. That's why you know, naturally fruit trees should be growing everywhere. For example, this is
Right.
why you go to a place like Southeast Asia. We discussed Philippines earlier. When you go anywhere in Southeast Asia, this you can throw a seed in the ground, that thing's gonna grow into a tree. Give it 5 years. You're gonna
Mhm.
have avocados. Like just because you have buried an avocado pit. The Almighty only deals in abundance and he deals in cycles. So that's why you're always gonna get enough rain. If you stop messing with the weather, you're going to get rain at the right time in the right amounts, and the ground is going to dissipate what it doesn't need. It's just like the body gets rid of when you eat, say, 2 pounds of food. If it only needs half a pound of food, it's going to get rid of the rest. It's going to get rid of it because he deals in efficiency. The Almighty deals in efficiency.
Right.
And abundance is efficient because you can always go get what you need. That which is not used, it will continue to go through its own cycles until eventually with the corrupted environment, we will experience death. Now, about the children, what's interesting about polygyny is that biologically or physiologically speaking, not biologically, but physiologically speaking, a woman is designed to only have ideally up to 4 children. Once your woman starts to go past 3 to 4 children, her body begins to break down. Her womb begins to prolapse. Even if she keeps putting them out, she can physically have multiple children when she's in her 40s. But once that happens, if you notice, those women age fast. Once they say
She
have their ninth
definitely
child,
does have a limited ability for childbearing. There's no
yes,
question. Where
yes,
where a man has an unlimited ability to plant seed
that's right.
until the day he, falls into the grave.
I
Um,
call that in the next book. I actually have a concept that I coined, and I call it the perpetual farmer. The perpetual farmer. That's what I
mm,
call it.
Yeah.
So a man, until the day he dies, as long as he has his sexual energy, he can
Yeah.
he can produce. So when you go back to Africa, so across the continent of Africa, you see a lot of men who are 90 and 100 who are still producing children.
Hmm.
They're still producing children,
Right.
and they're healthy. Like, see, once a man loses his sexual energy, that's when his decline begins.
Mm.
See, so that's the marker. Remember, you always have biological markers for your mental, psycho-emotional, your psycho-emotional, your spiritual, and your physical health. You always have markers, and
Mm.
that's the marker for a man's decline. That's why it's so important for us to avoid salt, processed sugar, and the overuse of additives and processed foods, because that targets your nervous system first, and then it targets your sexual
Your
health first.
vitality.
Yes, so they've proven that. But yeah,
Very good. So let's do this. Let's transition seriously into more of a hardcore discussion on polygyny as an economic tool or as economic warfare, because this was one of the things that where I understood initially in my studies of scripture just the fact that polygyny was not sin. It was okay with the Most High. It was his tool for doing things. I didn't really grasp it as an economic tool for building family, clan, and tribe until I read your book, the Polygamy Papers, and then saw some of your videos. And I know I've put your channel up here a couple times, and your YouTube channel has videos going back at least 9 years. That's as far back as I could find. And so,
I took them. That's because Peter, I took them down for about 2 years, but most of those videos go back between 2010 and 2015. So the
wow, okay.
earliest videos that you see there are actually going back to 2010.
So for you guys that are watching this, my viewers, this is a fantastic resource, and he actually, Brother Hondo digs into polygyny as economic warfare and an economic tool, and I think that's where I first got a clear understanding. Now, my personal passion for a decade or more is understanding, I was a pastor. I'm still a teacher, but I would not say that in the, occupying a pulpit sense, I'm not a pastor there. But I was a pastor in a traditional church, and then ultimately was kicked out because I started understanding Torah and understanding, that what God says about some of the things that he desires us to do. And that led me to a place that, as I'm digging in and saying, well, if the commandments aren't done away with, it led me to understanding and studying polygyny. Um, but it also led me to a passion of understanding prophecy, and that the Most High says he will restore Kol Israel being all Israel, returning the two houses, the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And to do that, it requires us to come to a place where we at least accept all of his ways, maybe walk in. For example, polygyny is not a requirement, but it's something that's an option for every man. But then also it begins to lead us to a place of building, understanding how Israel is structured, and building family, clan, and tribe. And then this sub piece, this is what the Father used to build Israel, is polygyny. So here it is as economic tool. I'd love for you to really delve into this, dig into some parts of this for us.
Okay, so at its core, when you have numbers, you have power. So I used to say all the time, there is power in numbers, and when you producing a family, the fact that you already have these beings in existence, you say have 10 people, you have say two wives and say 10 children, uh, versus and not even versus. I don't want to say that because monogamy has never been against polygamy or vice versa.
Right. Very
But
good. Yeah.
but vis-a-vis, monogamy, there's just the greater ability to do things, and it's just very practical. So,
Mhm.
for example, if you're a farmer, you're a farmer. That's why sometimes when the farmer was a monogamous, he would end up with 12 children. You know, I
It's
actually
labor.
Was that
It's labor.
it is labor, but you also get to instill values, and you
Mm,
start to instill law because the man is the head of the family, is the priest of that family.
mm,
He's the lawgiver and the enforcer of that family,
mm,
and they get to spread their ideas. So just imagine if you have a wide community that stretches across, let's say 50 square miles, for example, and you have 100 families, okay, and each family has 15 people in it. You know that now you talking about a community. What if outsiders come in to invade that community? Well, you've already tribed up. Now you don't need polygyny in order to do that, but as you said earlier, which is very true, the creator creates more women than men.
mhm.
And the fact that men have to have a myriad of skills versus a woman can be pretty, young, and we can start from there. That's how men are. We don't need this long laundry list. We can work on that later. But men
Right,
have to come to the table. We have to know 25 different things.
right,
So women are more accessible in that sense because we don't require a lot from them. We want you to show up. We want you to show up and be nice. And you're probably going to get married if you're a woman if you just show up and you're nice and you're somewhat attractive to us. You're showing being available. In other words, your time and your labor are
right,
available to us.
right,
You look prettier. Even if you're a 5, you become a 7.5. And that's sort of the magic that women have. They need to bolster themselves by being kind and being feminine and being cooperative. So that's one thing that you can do. So you produce more of who you are as a man, and that's why polygamous men or men even who are monogamous with large families, they're honored. Oh, well,
right.
your family's known for you all are like doctors and like surgeons and nurses, and the women are nurses, and a couple of the men are also nurses. There's a man named the late Mr. Khanna. Mr. Khanna lived in western. I think he lived near the border of China and India. And Mr. Khanna died, I think, about 3 or 4 years ago. But he had, if I'm not mistaken, he
I
had.
think I know who you're talking who you're talking about.
Hmm.
I mean, they basically had what looked like an apartment building. He had
Yes,
15 or
yes.
18 wives, or maybe even 30 wives, and had
Well,
90 children or something like
he-
that.
yeah, he had, I believe, 27 or 28 wives. He had 94 let's see, he had 94
Children.
children, and then he had about 40 grandchildren and about 20 great grandchildren. And they took over this town. They didn't take over the town through force, but
No.
he had businesses.
Mhm.
He had a furniture business. They built a stadium, a sports stadium. They had crops, and they were growing their own food. So most of the town was not only Mr. Khanna's family, but he was also a religious leader in a particular sect that
Mm.
his father had founded. And his father had founded this religious sect, and they also taught polygamy. So the religious sect as a group taught that it's okay for a man and it's encouraged for a man to have multiple women. If you notice, polygamous men, they produce a lot, and that's one of the advantages. Also, it provides women with a man. More women are going to get a man because let's just come from the perspective of we're not hitting women over the head and dragging them to the cave. There's no enslavement. A
Mhm.
lot of women actually like having a man who has other women because she views that as she's obtained the most dominant man or one of the most dominant men in her peer group.
It's
I,
certainly it's a status. It's a status because you know that the man is high status or high value,
Mhm.
if he's able to provide for and maintain that. In so many cultures, it's viewed that being a second or a third is actually a place of honor and preference over being a first or only because that involves more work and less status.
That's correct, and it also offers women the opportunity to follow what most cultures have followed when she's on her cycle. from her onset to her offset, that's approximately 7 days.
Mm-hmm.
She can go and read a book, she can journal, she can work on some business idea, present it to her husband, what have you. And she's not under any pressure, because when you get into etiology or the study of the course of disease, it's not healthy when you're sweating, there's pus, or there's blood, or there's sweat, and you walk into your kitchen and you pick up the dishes. That's why if you look at the old school families, and even in the United States, they'll say, "Oh, no. You don't go in the kitchen. Go wash your hands. Go take a shower first before you sit down to the dinner table." That's actually a medical thing. It's not just some weird social construct. That's because you can poison the food when you're sweating and you picking up the pots and pans and you're cooking. So how much more if you have an issue of blood for, say, 3 or 4 days out of the 7? It's an etiological issue,
Right.
and you have to be medically sound when you have a family. Oh, that was the other facet of economic warfare. I'm sorry, I forgot that, is medicine.
Right.
So you have to have medical protocols in place for your family.
And,
For
and
example,
and everything you just said is fully supported in scripture, particularly in
yes,
the book of Leviticus, where it talks about how to deal with the laws of Nidah, when a woman is on her cycle.
mhm.
Leviticus 15, I think. So yeah, keep going.
Yeah,
Good
yeah, the
stuff.
NIDA laws. Yeah, they're called the NIDA laws, in our nomenclature.
Mhm.
So it's, you have to have that in a society. You can't just, everybody can't just go around and say, well, uh, that's what society says. We, society says things for a reason. There's reasons that humans do things as a collective. There's reason that we have certain cultural memes. It doesn't just pop up. That all of that stuff came out of catastrophes, seismic upheavals, astral upheavals. You're talking about volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, tsunami, flood, typhoons, tornadoes. All these things at one point during human history were happening with such fervor and with such frequency that people began to migrate, and they had to create laws. And that's kind of where you get certain belief systems from, because
Right.
that's what they experience. And you create separation laws like NIDA laws, because when you're in the desert, or we are in a tropical environment, even where disease can easily carry
Mhm.
by insects, for example, or by touching certain plants, you have to separate people when they're not at 100%. You have
Mhm.
to.
Right.
You have to. So
Right.
those are some of the advantages. Also, aside from producing more children, um, going back to the women for a second, the choice of the women. I've had women tell me, with no uncertain terms. I remember she said to me, she said, "Why would I want a man that no other woman wants?"
Mm.
She said, "Why would I
Interesting.
want that?" She said, also, she said, "Hondo, at your age," but at the time I was in my mid-30s. She said, "At your age, if I if I'm with you and you're like, we're meeting for the first time and you don't have a woman already at 35," she said, "I want to be like, this isn't even a grown man right here. You're almost 40 and you don't have a girl? Nah." And that's how she put it. She said,
Right. Wow.
I
Interesting.
find, go ahead. So,
No. Go. I just said, wow, interesting.
well, women, I talk to women all the time. What people don't realize about my work is that almost half of my supporters are women. It's not like 90% men,
No. Yeah.
because some of the men feel guilty that they used to sleep around with a lot of women, say like frat brothers. Like I meet a lot of men who are in fraternities. They're like, well, hey, those are my days when I was wild and free. It's like, but you still want the Puerto Rican girl who lives next door. You still want her, but you just, you front because you feel guilty. And a lot of those men, they don't. They have daughters who they feel are top of the line when their daughters may not be top of the line. So you
Mm.
get into this pride thing. People start teaching prescriptive monogamy because they feel guilty about their own lives, where they failed, where they've done things the wrong way, whereas they could just reset and do things the right way. Also, some men are jealous of these polygamous men because polygamous men can go out and produce, and they see they're attracting the women that we're talking about. I have a woman right now. She literally called. I called her back, but we talked earlier. We talked earlier, maybe an hour before this interview, and then I called her back right before we started. And she told me with no uncertain terms, and this is something that men who are watching this have to understand. Everything about polygamy is not the woman so much loves polygamy. We need to get away from that. If she likes you and you are polygamous, she's gonna roll with your program. period.
Right.
She told me no uncertain terms. She said, Hondo, I like you. She said, I don't like the fact you got other women. I expected when I grew up that I would have a man to myself. And I started asking her questions. And that's something we have to understand. When we start asking the right questions, we get the right answers. So women like dominance. They like it even when they say they don't, because something here as a woman stirs them up. It stirs them up because they know that man can protect them in times of crisis, not necessarily with fists or guns. He's planning ahead. I'll give you an example, and I'll stop there because we can go on all day about that.
No. This is good. Yeah.
But during the pandemic, I noticed, and I was monitoring this in different countries, different settings, workplace, labor force, the office. Women were ponying up to polygamy. Women were on the job, like, telling the guy that's been flirting with them on the job, who's married, she's been rebuffing him. Like, nah, you married. What are you doing? Da, da, da. Now she's like, hey, I need a place to stay. Because economic upheavals hit women harder than men.
Mm-hmm.
It always does. So the service industry is dominated by women. The nursing field is dominated by women. So when women were getting kicked off the jobs because some didn't want to have vaccines, some women got the vaccine, changed their mind about its protocol. They were struggling.
Right.
I heard about hundreds of women that were moving in with a man and his wife, and she was basically a concubine. Even if there was no sex, she was being cared for, and she had to clean up that man's house. She had to bring that man a chunk of change. Like, oh, you want to stay here for what, 6 months? Okay, you were paying $3,000 for rent in Jersey somewhere. Well, you gonna have to pay me $2,000. This was going on. There were major polygamous deals going on.
Right.
So we have to understand that even though some people argue against us, saying, well, that was when war was happening and people were dying. Well, people are still dying. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? People are still dying due to all these facets of economic warfare we're talking about. They're still dying. And you still need a man. So when women say they're independent, they're saying, I don't have a man. I don't have to do what a man says in the morning. I don't have to get up and go do something that he tells me to do. That's actually what they mean. So humans are interdependent on each other. Men are dependent on women to do certain things. We can't get certain things done. We will not survive without women. We're just not going to survive.
Right.
So these things have to be placed out in the forefront. And people, I'm telling everybody watching who doesn't understand what we're saying, doesn't want to believe it, you don't want it to be too late. Even the men. I've had a couple of men come to me in the past who said, I wasn't feeling polygamy. I don't feel like doing that. That's too much stress, right? Which is fine. Every man has to understand what he can take, what he can't take. But women were coming to this man like, hey, she's attractive. And finally, she kind of broke that barrier. And he's like, okay, now I need help because I slept with the woman, and to them, it's a moment of weakness. I'm like, no, you were just doing what men do.
Right.
But you should have had a system set up and in place to handle that. Just give you an example from my own life. One of my consorts, she's Filipina. She was raised deep in the mountain. Like, I'm talking about far away. Like, you can't see this place unless you journey. She speaks 11 languages. She understands additional 3 languages. She had long black natural hair. Okay. Almost down to her knees. Okay. She told me in no uncertain terms, she's gorgeous. She said, babe, if you were not honest with me about it, I would consider you a liar and I wouldn't do this with you. She said, but I don't mind you having other women. She said, that's your culture. She said, and I'm here to serve you. She said, that's it. I'm here to serve you. She said, if you want other women, all I ask is that if you move us into the same house, I don't want to be fighting. She said, I'm gonna have a problem with that. And I say that's something I would handle if you come to me with that. You don't gotta go.
Yeah.
You got sometimes you gotta counsel your women. But when a man is truly dominant, he understands that you have to be a polygamist. Don't believe in it and think it's theory. You have to walk and act like that. Everything you do is from a polygamous construct.
Right.
And that's the whole secret behind it. And I rarely ever have women trying to argue with me about polygamy. It's very rare. It's extremely rare. And I've never had my women fighting over me before. I don't even know what that's like. That's why it's strange to me when I hear dudes trying to keep their women from,
Well,
body.
it usually, to start with, you started talking a little bit about
Mhm,
the circumstance where the guy comes to you and says, I slept with a woman and made a mistake. And of
mhm.
course, it's doing what men do, but the I get the same kind of calls from men going, I find myself in this circumstance. Now, what do I do? When in fact, what they need to be doing, and what I'm hearing you say is you've got to get this straight first.
Mhm.
You've got to get your mind wrapped around the way you're created, the way that you're designed, and then you have to learn what's necessary to walk it out effectively,
Yes.
and then you're properly prepared to have more than one woman and be able to begin to manage that and learn how to work with it and so on and so forth. But
Because
you're right. It's a mindset. It's not, and you've got to be sure of what you're doing and able to not just defend it and articulate it, but to walk it out so that you're not bringing doubt into the circumstance or doubt into the women when you're not handling things the way that it needs to be handled.
Pete, women can smell fear on a man. They smell it and they will run away from you very quickly. You have to be absolutely fearless when it comes to what you want to do in life. See, this ain't so. I always tell people polygamy is not about polygamy.
Right.
And people who know, they know exactly what I mean. Polygamy is not about polygamy.
Right.
And when a woman sees that you serious, like this is what's happening. This is what I'm doing. I'm going to school today. I'm graduating in this month. I'm starting this business here. Then they see it start and they see you making money. They're like, oh, so that's man is serious. Now they're more likely to get on board. Um, there's a young lady that I talk to now, and also Filipina, and she's used to being in a very corporate environment. She's used to making decent money and things. So I have to deal with her differently than my woman in the province or from the province, right? And
Mhm.
she doesn't like me having other women, but she's like, you know what? I, let's talk. Let's parlay. Let's do this. And it's a dance that men have to do this dance from a very mature perspective. That way, you don't have to talk about polygamy all the time. And I even told her, I said, I don't want to talk about my other women all the time. You always ask about my women. Like, I said, we don't even need to talk about that right now. Because I have to put it in her mind that you need to stay in your lane. Don't get too nosy. You got your own verbal contract agreement, what we're going to do, what we're not going to do. We have that. And this kind of comes down to the strategy of dealing with your women. Don't let them control the narrative about polygamy in your household.
Right.
So whereas my other woman understands it, and she was actually her godparents are Muslim, so
Mm.
she traveled throughout the Philippines with them, and she worked for a Muslim politician, and because her godparents were Muslim, she was able to learn the um, the Islamic culture that's in the southern Philippines. So I said, because I asked her when we first met, I said, have you seen did you meet any Islamic families when you were there? She said, yeah. She said, I even sat and talked with the women. The women actually taught me about polygamy too.
Mm.
And this was earlier in her life. This was like probably 15 years ago or so, but it's fresh in her mind. So she said, when we met, I understood what you were telling me. She's like, you didn't even have to tell me a lot. So I was like, I like you. So that's what you're doing. That's cool. And that's why I always tell men, choose women who speak at least two languages, and choose women, if you're going to get a woman who's not from your society, get a woman who's still a bit experienced with other societies, so she's not so narrow, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And to back up, I want to hit on that right there as well. But something you said just a second ago is, a woman's looking for a man who knows where he's going. Um, and I talk often about mission and vision, or vision and mission. What are, in terms of masculinity, asking men, where's your family going to be 50 years after you die? What's the trajectory you're setting for your family?
Mhm.
And polygyny as an economic tool, to go back to kind of the main theme we're talking about here,
Mhm.
part of it is a tool in your tool basket for making a difference long term in
Yeah.
culture and society, or
Yes.
in our case, the restoration of Kol Israel, right?
Hmm.
Um, but let's see, we stuck a pin just a second ago on something else. What was it you said? Um, because I said I wanted to come back to that. What was that? I just went, I didn't write it
Uh,
down.
you're talking about, well, I think you mentioned the longevity, like the trajectory of your lineage
Right, right.
and survival, basically into the next age.
Oh, I know what it was that you said. You were talking about women who are pliable, and it is very true that the less rigid they are, the easier it is to help them begin to fit into a family structure that is more than just one man. Um, Goes back to women who tend to be multicultural happen to generally have more of that pliability and have the ability to
Yes.
fit together or to mesh a little more easily.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and I'm I did a video the other day. In fact, I did it with both of my wives, and we did a video. In part of it, we talked a little bit about Western women versus the idea of Eastern women, or women who are just automatically submissive or what have you. And one of the big points that I made is I think particularly American culture that has been exported through media, music, movies, so on and so forth. I think we've brought wokeness to the world, and it's hard to find unless you really go into the mountains of the Philippines or someplace way off the beaten track. It's
Mhm.
hard to find women that have not already been affected or infected by the feminism that we have in the cultures out there. But and so there are a lot of men that are looking for these women that magically will make everything happen really easily. Instead, what they need to be doing is working on themselves, because at the end of the day, you can take two Western women and make this work if they're willing to be in submission to the man, but the man's got to take ownership and take leadership. And it comes down to whether or not the man will do the work more so even than the women, because it's a leadership thing.
I would like to build on what you said regarding the choices in women, um, if I may. You know,
Sure, please.
uh,
I'd love to hear your thoughts.
there's in the way that I choose women, I always get women who have lived a rugged life.
Mm,
That means they've seen hard. Like I don't like women who haven't seen hard shit. Like I'm talking about where you literally know how to build a knife, build a house, trap animals, hunt, fish. You know how to run a
mm.
business. You know you see. I only choose, and that's why I only choose women who speak at least two languages. They have to be fluent in at least two languages. I speak two languages, so I'm coming to the table with my own tool set. Like you said, the man has to have his own tools he brings to the table, and everybody putting their stuff in. So between me and my consorts, we speak, I believe when I counted, we speak 17 languages.
Mm,
You see? So
yeah,
it's like for me that's the norm. And even before that, when I was first starting out, as I was I guess just dating multiple women, I still had women from other countries in my cipher. So it was like I knew that would build me up as a man. See, because energy circulates within a polygamous family, within any family, but especially polygamous family. Polygamous men tend to be multifaceted anyway, and we tend to think in terms of impossibilities are possible. There's no such thing that we can't reach out and do. That just
right,
doesn't, like, what are you talking about? We can't do that. Why can't we become billionaires? What are you talking about? Why can't I go get 10 degrees? Why can't I? Why can't I go
right.
build a corporate? Why can't I do that? So when I was a golf caddy, one thing I learned by observing in some of the conversation I've had with very prominent men and even a couple of prominent women is that there's a whole world out there that exists that most people, even some of those of us in these polygamous circles, talk about. We don't want to touch that, and it's nothing sinful. It's just that people on that level, like for example, a lot of the things that elite families do is what you're supposed to be doing. Like you're supposed to be building a large family. You're supposed to send your children off somewhere. You're supposed to have a trust fund. You're supposed to do that. You don't have to be nefarious to do it, but some of them do that. So we're
Right.
not advocating that and bloodshed just to get somebody's
Sure.
stuff.
Yeah.
But what we are advocating is that when you want to do this, and again, go back to your point about working on yourself, you have to come with a set of tools. That's why when I'm in the Philippines, and I'm gonna tell men this: if you can have 2 or more women in the Philippines cooperating, you can do polygamy anywhere because those are the most jealous women on the planet.
Mm.
They're hard, but I only talk to women who come from the province. If they're raised in the city, they just have to be very much into like me, what I'm doing. They got to be bringing something. And
Right.
women who are battle hardened and have passed through various tests, those are the women I want on my team because now I know I can say A and B, and you're going to come up with C. You know, I don't have to. There's a lot you don't have to say whether they're 18 or young. Because I'm talking a lot of the men. You're going to be 25 and trying to do this. Whether they're 18 or whether they're 40 or more older, you want women who understand what's really going on. They have to understand how men operate. I only take on women who understand that men are very primal and they want me to release that energy upon the household. That's I don't get feminists. I don't try to retrain them. I don't try to re-educate them. There's no because that's a waste of time. The only
Right.
thing people I want to teach are cooperative people. It's just like you kick uncooperative students out of your class. You see, you kick them out of class and they get expelled from the school system because they're not cooperating. And again, we have to take a very hard, a very militant stance when we are building our economies as single men. Then we get one woman, or if you take on 2 at a time, for example, which can happen. Um, we have to be hard line, no mercy, absolutely no mercy when it comes to outsiders trying to come in and destroy your path. You
Mhm.
have a part. So every man, and this is my last point, every man has to have a path, as you said, a trajectory. And when you see a disturbance in the air, too many leaves are falling.
Mm.
The birds start flying up from the treetops.
Everything's
Somebody
leaving.
and you need to move forward with all due speed and diligence
Mm.
and preserve your body and mind. You take care of your body. You work out 5-6 days a week. You make sure you're 80 years old. You can still lift weights. You can still run. You said we need to do that because these women require our time too. They require romance and affection, and we need to
Mhm.
take care of ourselves. That's part of the trajectory. That's the centerpiece of your journey is you preserving your own body. So anyway, it's, there's so
No,
much.
no, this is great stuff. A lot of great tips, a lot of great points. And for the audience, it's just like your book. It's just loaded with golden nuggets that are fantastic to go back and process and think through and work through and that sort of thing. So um absolutely. Excellent, excellent. Now you have been back and forth to the Philippines multiple times, or you have and you've got different business things going on here in the US, or what's kind of
Well,
kind of how is it that you as a person, as a man, operate? Just out of curiosity.
as far as finance are concerned, I work in the transportation industry. I'm a contractor, so I do technically work for myself. Um, I also, of course, have my book. The second book, of course, is coming sometime later this year. I don't have an exact date yet. I will announce that once I have that up. Um, you know, doing business in the Philippines, one of my consorts, the one I mentioned before, who speaks multiple languages, she actually owned a store before, so she knows how to do that. I might set her up with that so she can operate that. It's a good idea to always either, if your women are giving you all of their money, I guess their paycheck, as you say, it's a good idea to make sure that they have what they need plus money in their pocket. You want to make sure that you redistribute that so that they not sitting there with no, you just like, well, I'm just gonna buy your clothes. Like, no, man, give some money,
Yeah.
man. Stop being tight. You can't be a cheap polygamist. And I want guys to understand that. Don't penny pinch when you
Mm,
go into this. Don't even think about that. Don't Thrifty is fine. Cheap is not fine.
mm,
So your financial output has to be there. So I'm actually getting a remote work in the in cybersecurity very soon, and software engineering. We're going into development operation, what's called DevOps. That's front and back end software development. I have an app that I'm creating. I'm creating a travel app because I've seen 49 out of 50 states by land. I'm also establishing bases of operation in different countries, because that's also something that men are going to need. You always want residencies. You always want second citizenships, even third or fourth or fifth citizenships. You want that because that covers your family in the event of some type of catastrophe, some type of economic upheaval, whether it's financial, whether there's a pandemic. Because a lot of people are stuck in their own countries. Most people don't even have a passport in the United States. See, in Europe, it's common to have a passport,
Right.
especially Western Europe. Like you ain't like you don't have a passport, but in the United States, I believe it's less than 10% of the population has a passport. I believe it's like 7 or 8%.
Right.
In the American Black population, only about 4%
Mm.
passports. So those of you who are a Black American, you're Native American, just pay attention to that. You travel. I'm not a tourist, I'm a traveler. So when I go places, and I want to introduce to people my theory of the 4 pillars of international economics. I'm going to introduce this. The 3BW formula, I call it. You want to open a bank account, and this is in the other countries that you visit. Open a bank account, buy property, build a business. You want to have a woman. Okay, 3BW. Always remember that. Do not go to other countries just searching for women, because women are your auxiliary. They're your there's a commanding officer on a naval ship, and then you have an executive officer who's your second in command. Your main wife or your main consort is your executive officer. Okay,
Mm.
she needs to have resources in her hands. So you want to build online now in this present age. You want to have as much stuff going on as possible. So aside from my remote work, I'm actually redoing the polygamous papers. I'm going to edit that. It's going to be about 100 pages. Then I'm finishing the other book. I'm starting my publishing company. I'm actually going to have take on other authors. These things are going to bring money into the populace. Also, if you all look up an interview I did with Brother Robert Reed of High Value Hebrew, you look that up on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. We did an hour-long interview while I was in the Philippines last month. And one of my consorts, she was there with me. She and I are working on a project on Filipino herbalism, because she's also an herbalist that has 100 plants cataloged in her head.
Right.
So as we've traveled, we covered about a quarter of the Philippines when I was there. We actually traveled all around the Philippines, and she would stop me and say, "Oh, this is what oregano can do," because oregano grows wild in the Philippines. You literally walk outside your house, there's oregano all in the field. Um, she even helped heal my ear with using oregano. She actually just flamed it, warmed it up, squeezed the juice, put it in my ear. She did that over the course of 2 days, and my ear popped, and I could hear. In fact,
Mm.
when I left, by the time I left the Philippines, my hearing was so sharp. When I got back, I could hear everything.
Mm.
And having someone like that in your cipher is very important. But I actually came up with this idea for a book on fasting and herbalism from a Filipino perspective. So we're actually putting
Interesting.
that together. Her
Nice.
name is going to be on the book. And it's going to be, Hondo Solomon with then my consort's name. And she liked it because she said, "Oh, she said, yeah. So wow, we can make money like that." I say, "Absolutely." So
Right.
you always want to incorporate your consort, your wives, your concubines' talents, and monetize the collective talent pool, the collective talent of the pool that you have available, which is you and your consorts. You always
Right.
monetize that, and you make sure things are not just verbal. You want to have a written legal contract, because this is where people get into trouble. They don't. We like to get all lost in the weeds and the heavens and don't want. Well, no, they would never do that. No, 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 no. It's business. As a matter of fact, if you look in, I believe I forgot the name is Dick. You know what? I'm going to give you that resource off camera. I have to find this dictionary from, I think, the 1920s, 1930s, and then maybe you can disseminate it to your listeners on your other programs. But there's an old dictionary. I think it's the New Collegiate Dictionary. When you look up the word sex, the fourth definition of sex is commerce. Now, So that means that when you get a woman, that's business. You're conducting business. Having sex with a woman is business. When you
Right.
open a business, that's business. When you walk down the road, that's business, because now you're engaging in politics
Right.
with your
Well,
wife.
and we can see that going back in history with marriage. We look at marriage today as a love and romance thing, but
Yes.
that's actually a very modern idea.
Yes.
Marriage has always been about business, where it either connects families or you're bringing someone in that can help you accomplish, or the man brings someone in that can help him accomplish the mission that he's about. And so he's looking to add players to his team, a
Yes.
term that you used earlier. Yeah, yeah,
That's absolutely
perfect
correct.
fit.
That's absolutely correct, Pete. And like also with the finances, one of the things I'm doing, I'm opening a training company, and we talked about this offline. I'm opening a training company for professional drivers.
Mhm.
Now, these videos that I'm going to have are like, it's very advanced stuff. It's stuff that you probably know because you've been in the game a long time. But most drivers coming into the industry,
Mhm.
they're winging it. That's why we
Right,
see these bad drivers and was like, what are you doing? Like,
right,
but as you know, most of the training systems, and I guess the training videos that are out, they use the same people, same age bracket, same demographic, and you get the same look and feel. Whereas the times have changed. In the last 4 years, the amount of trucks on the road has doubled.
mhm,
You didn't see all these trucks on the road before. Now
right,
sometimes you go down a freeway. This is a major highway, an interstate, and you'll see 70% of the vehicles on the road are trucks, are semis. Well, we didn't have to deal with that 5 years ago and 10 years ago. So, but we're teaching the same techniques of driving. We
right,
can't do that. So,
right.
so I'm coming in
And
with like,
and and the schools themselves, you driving schools, because of course most of my viewership knows that I train
yes,
CDL, mostly B class, but
mhm,
working on an A class program for I work for the state is what I do.
yes,
But
yes, and it's in a major industry. That's also important. You want to go where the money is at. You want to
sure,
go where long-term contracts are at. That's how you make money as a family too. Don't just go nickel and diamond. No,
right.
get yourself some local jurisdictional contracts. You're grant writers or something like that. And you get
Right.
in with whoever. It's just there's literally 100 ways a family can make money now. So those are just some of the things that we're doing.
So even for single men, but as you build your family, build your clan, build your tribe,
Mm,
um, it's a common term to talk about side hustles today, but what you want to be doing is looking for a side hustle that isn't simply exchanging time for money, but
right.
instead is building something that will allow ongoing income, or royalties is a lot of the way that gets termed, maybe through you're finding ways, looking for ways to make money while you sleep, or looking for ways to make money while you're
Yes.
not there. Um,
Yes.
Examples, obviously, an album, or writing a book where you have that ongoing royalty. But
Yes, and I'm
anything,
a songwriter also. I meant to tell y'all that I belong with ASCAP, American Society for Composers, Authors, and
yeah,
Publishers. I've been a songwriter for years, and
yeah.
because I come from family musicians. Both sides of my family were professional musicians at one point. So,
But the point is just looking for uh, how you can use and marshal your skills and the skills of any woman or women that are added into your family for the
yes,
purpose of building family wealth,
yes,
and finding ways to do that so that you're not directly exchanging time for money. Because exchanging time for money means you go to work at the convenience store. Now, that's a short term kind of thing. It might be a short term fix, but at the end of the day, you've given X amount of time, you get X amount of money, and you have to go give the same amount of time again to earn the money again.
yes,
Um, there are a lot of people that make a great deal of money, and I'm not one, not one of them, but who make a great deal of money using social media, or using YouTube, or having channels. Maybe it's cat videos, or maybe it's travel videos, or maybe it's whatever. But you build a viewer base that is interested in what you're doing, and
yes,
then from that viewer base, you're able to uh, grow an ongoing income that, as long as you're feeding it periodically and keeping that going, it keeps feeding you.
It's a
So
plant.
that's
You know, it's like
yep,
a plant. You know, you
yeah,
just give some water every so often. Let it rain every so often. You know, you gotta right amount of sunlight. You know, let it keep producing. You know, the coconut tree produces in the Philippines. It produces 3 to 4 times a year. You know,
right. The
it's all
the 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 challenge is it takes time to get it planted, it takes time to water it, it takes time to get it going, but once it's going, it will continue to produce and continue to produce and
yeah,
continue. And
yeah,
that's the kind of income that the average man and particularly somebody who's building wealth or building polygyny or using polygyny as an economic tool, you're
mhm.
looking for ways to um, use those skill sets for ongoing income, not just one-time income.
That's right. That's right.
So, yeah, fantastic. What else you got? Yeah, you've got so much good stuff, man. I am adding all kinds of notes here for things to go look up and research and read
Um,
about.
well, I know that again off camera we mentioned the whole thing about so-called race. That's something that I
Yeah,
definitely want to address because
please.
partly because my work is sometimes misunderstood, but also just for the wider topic, we have to understand that it's always going to look different depending on your culture. It's going to like how you
Right.
deal with everything going on, depending on your nation, your culture,
Mhm.
your ethnicity, etc. So
Sure.
I know that when I started off, I was studying the Bible and I was studying the African continental and then I guess the Pan African um, forms of polygamy, which is very communal. You know,
Mhm.
Africans when it comes to polygamy is very very communal,
Right.
and everywhere else I notice is not necessarily communal. It's less
Right.
communal. When you go to Asia, Europe, South America, it's not necessarily we live in a compound, we live in a village, you know.
Right.
But I started off like that, and then I started seeing, I started meeting up with different people who are from other societies, and I began studying it from a European perspective. I found that again, those countries that I mentioned, Italy, France, let's see who else is doing that. Oh yeah, Amsterdam,
Mhm.
England, Spain, and Portugal. They specifically were the European powers who implemented prescriptive monogamy and through enslavement. And this is what I meant earlier. I didn't finish that thought, but
Right.
through
Yeah.
enslavement pressed prescriptive monogamy into these societies through sheer
Mhm.
force. So,
Right.
meanwhile, the conquerors were engaging in polygamy,
Right.
specifically concubinage. So, we're looking at that, and I said, okay, let me go research. And so, I went literally around the earth and I researched every society I could find, past and present. So, I've researched several hundred societies and their marriage customs and what they were doing. I said, okay. So what I found was that and there was a book, and I'm going to have to find it. I'm going to send it to you. Because from what I've seen, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I've seen, you have most of your audience is sort of the white community that has kind of,
Yeah, I would
I've
say
seen
that
your name
my
in those circles. I've seen your name in those circles when I was
yeah,
around.
I would say that my audience is probably very diverse.
Mhm.
Some Christian, largely Torah keeping, black, white. I've got
Okay.
some Asians that I know of. I've got people from Japan, Taiwan,
Okay.
a lot of people from Africa actually that tune in. I've got a number of followers and just did a video, a video chat conversation with a bunch of African pastors. So
Wow.
that was
See, I found out
fascinating.
about you through I think biblical family, so that I kept
Right,
seeing your
right,
name
right,
everywhere. So that's why I was like, okay, so he got command of that. But that's good though because what I'm teaching from the perspective I'm teaching from is like no matter where you're at, like I'm trying to implement a system where it's a general system, and you can then adjust it according to your culture.
right,
Because
right.
I know that when I started early on, I found this book. It was about 300 pages. It was a white American man. I forgot the name of the book. I'm gonna find it. I'm gonna send it to you. But he wrote a book promoting polygamy for his words for the white race because he said, look at the degradation and the debauchery that's coming in. He wrote this book, I think, in like the late 19th century, like 1890 or something. This is when some of
Wow,
these books were
fascinating,
coming out. Yeah,
fascinating.
there were a lot of books on from a traditionalist perspective coming out during the 19th and early 20th centuries. And,
Now there is a book that I'm familiar with from the 1870s or 80s by James Campbell
mm,
titled Monogamy versus Polygamy.
that
And
that's not it. That one's not it. I know what you're talking about. That
Okay.
that one's
Yeah.
not it. Though. This particular book, he was really he was really on like, hey, we need to, in his words, preserve the white race. So what I'm saying is that
Yeah.
polygamy always as an economic warfare tool, no matter who you are and whether we agree with their
It sounds like he was using it as an ethnic warfare tool, which
yes,
to
yes,
me is a
yes.
no-go, but
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I
I'm
understand his purpose. He sees it as a tool for that. Okay,
Yeah,
go ahead.
but we can still learn from these things
Right.
by studying these authors and why they're pressing it. Just like you have some Pan African perspectives, and you actually need that because when you move, if you ever have to move among people who don't look like you,
Mm,
then you have to know how to operate. And see, again, this is economic warfare. You have to study other people, not necessarily
right,
your so-called enemies, but it's
right.
just like when I go to the Philippines, I studied their culture for almost 10 years before I even went there. I studied the culture. So when I went there, I knew manners and customs. And people were like, wait, how do you know that? I even, at some point, I could speak several of the languages on a basic level. And when language transmits culture. So that's another reason that you get women from other societies or women from your own ethnicity or culture who speak multiple languages because
Right.
you can function on a practical level and people respect you when you go to those lands where that's the native or the mother tongue. So
Right.
when it comes to so-called race, people like to get off into ethnocentricity, which if it's toward a positive goal, like which is preserving our culture, that's one thing. It's another thing when you say, well, that's a sin if you go over there. Let's say if I go to France
Right.
and I get a French woman. Well, I can do that. I
Yeah.
mean, I can do that if I want to,
Right.
because you're a sovereign being under the creator's guiding hand. So you can go get whichever women are cooperative with your structure. And
Mm,
we see that even when we look in the book of Ruth. Okay. Ruth was actually not, she was actually she was a Moabite. She wasn't Hebrew. So, you know, she ended up marrying a Hebrew man though. That's
right.
just one example,
Right.
because
Right. Yeah.
her relative actually knew of a man who may take her on and gave her some sound advice.
Right.
So we're seeing even in that story, we see a lot on economic warfare within that story. She had to turn into a diplomat and go approach this man like, hey, like, listen, this is what it is. I don't got a husband. And it was very straightforward. And there was not a lot of you don't see a lot of ceremony involved. In fact, in Hebraic society, it's a fairly new thing to have lavish weddings and things like that. That's fairly new.
That is correct. You are
You know,
correct.
ancient the North African or what we call Near Eastern cultures, those cultures, if it was a political marriage, they would have big lavish weddings normally. You
Esther.
normally, yeah, Book of Esther, So we have to understand like what's going on, like with culture like biology always trumps culture. In other words, you're gonna do as a man what you're gonna do. Culture is something which it's a system we create as humans,
Mm,
but culture also trumps things like ethnicity and race because you can have people from the same culture who are not from your so-called race. They don't have your same skin tone.
right.
So it's a that's the challenge also that polygamous men have to deal with because even if you marry, let's say if you're a man from, let's say you're a white man from say Detroit, Michigan, and you marry a woman from West Bloomfield, Michigan, which is an hour down the road. Well, you still, you may make more money than her. So she comes from say a poor family and he comes from a wealthy family. You're going to have to bridge this gap. That's the challenge for us as men. You're gonna have to bridge this
Right.
gap, you
Right.
know. And I've always enjoyed women of other ethnicity because I knew that they spoke multiple languages. This is even when I was a teenager. I knew I would have women from other lands. I knew it. I would dream about it because
Right.
I knew they spoke other languages. I knew they could teach me because your women are there also to show you the way. Remember, wisdom is portrayed as a woman in the Bible.
Mm.
Not to say that men shouldn't be wise, but woman is portrayed as a. I'm sorry,
Or
wisdom
wisdom
is
is, yeah.
portrayed as a woman.
Right.
If you look at the end of the book of Proverbs, yeah, you look at the end of Proverbs, the woman displayed there was a housewife who had servants, and those are
Right.
female servants. And generally, the wives didn't give orders to male servants. Generally, they didn't do that.
Right.
But that means that she had concubines. And by the way, concubines from a biblical perspective or pilgashim were actually Hebrew women. They were not slaves because remember, in Torah, we were not allowed to take slaves when we went to war. We could not enslave the people. We weren't even
Right.
allowed to do that. So a lot of people assume that we were taking on slaves and concubines. No, they were young Israelite women who would come into the household, and sometimes they would be added to the family as a junior wife. Sometimes they would not. If the man had sex with her, it was understood that you should take her on as a wife. It's very simple, the concubine issue. They were just Israelite servants.
Right.
That's it. And understanding even that, going into another society, like there was a man who told me he had an opportunity to take on a woman. He was in the he was Beta Israel, okay, which is what I practice. He was with the North African Jews, and he had a chance to take on a concubine, and I was fascinated because they have a whole process by which to do that. They still have that intact. So being culturally aware and knowledgeable is extremely important. Not just I visited I visited Morocco, for 2 months. No, you were on vacation. Can you function? That's why when people in these travel vlogs, when they say, "Oh, I'm a travel, no, you're a tourist." I love the food, the people, the culture. That's usually a lie, because unless you can go to the heart of that culture and you can get you a wife from that culture because you're knowledgeable, you're wise, and you're a man who's prominent due to your wisdom and knowledge, then you're just on vacation. Remember, 3BW: build a business, open a bank account, buy property, and you get a woman. Those things should always be woven together when you are traveling, specifically when you're traveling to the same country, because now you have economic power and civic governments take you seriously when you are engaged in their culture. I'm going to say that again. When you go as a tourist, there is no government on the planet that respects you when you are a tourist. But when you start saying, I am coming with a master's degree in phytobiology, or biochemistry. I also have a PhD in biochemistry. They say, oh, yeah, we'll be glad to give you citizenship. Oh, yeah, okay. Because when you fill out these applications for additional citizenships and for permanent residence, you have to write down, do you own a business? They're going to ask you that.
Yeah.
What is your profession?
You've got to bring value,
Yeah,
and they want you to bring value in the same way you should want your woman to bring value.
that's absolutely correct. And what it does, it also allows you to engage in economics in your woman's country, unless you don't want to be part of that particular society. But I always recommend it for men. If you get a woman, say, again, let's go back to France. If you're going to get a French woman, even if she's going to say, come to, I don't know, let's say she's going to move with you to India. If you're an Indian man, okay, if you're going to move her to India, you should still get citizenship in France, which is very doable. They offer permanent residence and second citizenships, especially if you marry under their government. Now, you have to study you have to study the marriage laws of these countries, because it has to be amenable to what you're doing. For example, for those men who are watching this program and you have a Filipino consort, you're not married legally. You can have polygamous rights if you marry under Sharia law. Now, many of my practices are very Islamic also, because I have Islamic influence in my life just because of the people that I've came up with. And I know Muslims, in different countries. If I wanted to marry my consorts, the Filipino government's laws, which under what's called the Filipino Family Code, they're not amenable to polygamy. You can actually you can be imprisoned for engaging in polygamy, right? For having they call it a mistress, but a mistress just is a lady master of the house. That's a man's wife. So they've even
Right.
misdefined
Right.
what a mistress is. A mistress is just a lady master of the house. But you can marry under Sharia law in the Philippines, for example, and they have the government the wider government will acknowledge you and say you got 3 additional wives. You can have multiple wives under Sharia law. I'm just saying we have to think outside the box,
Right.
because I know some people
Use,
watching are
use
not.
the system against itself.
Correct. Correct. Use the system against itself. And they actually have, the government has a contract with the Islamic people in Mindanao. Like if you want to marry, you can marry. And they have to acknowledge them as your wives. They cannot say, and take you to jail. Because remember, you do whatever it takes under moral and ethical means to secure your family. And I want everybody that way, they will expand everyone, your listeners' minds. Whatever you can do under moral and ethical guidelines to grow your family and to maintain it and to protect it and to secure it, that's what you do. So it's very important to always be in a mode of study, because you're the progenitor of this family. Okay, you have to study. I'm up all the time. I'm usually up at 4 or 5 a.m. I don't go to sleep till 10. Part of that, 5 of those hours are taken out just for me to study things. You see, and that's why, that's why, Pete, that's why a lot of guys say, man, I can't do that. I don't see how you do that. I don't see how you have 2 women. I don't see how you got 5 women. What? Because it takes so much time, and they want to play video games or they want to go make some more money, which is fine.
Yeah.
But you can actually make more money when you have multiple wives.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, that's the thing about race and culture. People have to understand that. And you have to be you can't be, it's okay to support your culture because that's your culture, right?
Right.
But the moment you begin talking about harming another society, that's when, okay, we need to take a step back and, we need to revisit this thing. But yeah,
Right.
with me, most of the world's people are actually of mixed ethnicity. The vast majority of the people now, there's no such thing as a pure culture. You rarely ever find it. The Eritreans and the Ethiopians are actually the same people. They're the exact same people, because
Right.
they just had a civil war several hundred years ago. They had a civil war that split the nation apart, but they're the exact same people. That's why they speak Amharic, Tigrinya, Gez. See, so they have the oldest Bible, by the way. It's actually in Gez. It's not
Right.
in Amharic. Amharic came in Tigrinya came out of the Gez language.
Right.
So we have to see exactly what we're doing. Oh, by the way, the most complex marriage system in the world that's still in existence is the Hindu marriage system. If you really want to understand marriage and specifically polygamy, study the Hindu works, the ancient Hindu works. Also study the Swamis from 1960s up until the 2000s, and study the transcripts of their lessons, like their in-person lessons, because they usually get somebody to transcribe their teachings.
Right.
They have a lot of, specifically the Hare Krishnas. The Hare Krishnas have a lot of great teaching on polygamy, and it does not actually contradict Hebraic law. A lot of people assume that, like, well, doesn't their marriage code? No. Read what they say about polygamy. That's exactly what we do.
Yeah, and for things like that, I tell people, absolutely that my foundation is the Torah, my foundation is Scripture, but there are other places that we can learn wisdom that's been acquired. You just have to chew the meat and spit out the bones. It takes a lot of wisdom and discernment to know what to hold on to and what to throw away.
Yes. Yes.
But it doesn't necessarily hurt to be putting pieces together, because one of the things that we're doing is we're recapturing ancient culture,
Yes.
and we're recapturing ancient truths that were normal to pretty much all cultures
Yes.
until the Greco-Roman, mindset began and then pushed into Europe and supplanted what, I mean, even you said that there was polygyny in many of those cultures before Greco-Romanism really pushed in, primarily riding the Roman Catholic Church. And they were using monogamy as a system of dominion instead of recognizing, or monogamy only, I should say, as a system of
that's
dominion.
called prescriptive monogamy. That's called
Right.
prescriptive monogamy, specifically.
Right. But they use that as a tool of dominion, which, back to what we said a while ago, is exactly what happened in Africa,
Yes,
whether they intended that or not. You and I would probably agree that the elites practice polygyny on the side quietly
they do.
and teach monogamy because they understand that it's inherently a system that is for building power and wealth.
Well, remember what the Rothschild told me. He told me to my face that everything that we're talking about, we talked about this for 5
Right.
hours on the golf course. He said everything you said is actually what we do.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I was literally on the golf course laughing, like, and people think we're just saying this like it's conspiracy. I'm like, no, I just spoke with one of the members of one of the world's, richest families, and you
Yeah.
can't see we're not telling the truth. I would like to comment a little bit on, the there's a lot of, specifically, the white Ashkenazi Jews like to press prescriptive monogamy. Most of them, they actually have a movement among their own who they're trying to battle back, and they're like, no, we practice polygamy, like we should be,
Yeah.
especially if we can take care of and another woman preserve our culture. So, when you talk about, people are talking about, like, I guess there was a scholar who, I guess, he wrote a letter to the Jews in France. Okay. And
Rabbi
people,
Gershom, 10
yeah,
20 CE. That's
yeah,
what yeah.
that is absolutely
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
Yes. That people try to quote Rabbi Gershom. Now I've researched Rabbi Gershom and what the letter he wrote. So I'm gonna address this real quick, because a lot of people who are specifically Lubavitch, white Ashkenazi Jews, they like to come back at us with this. So when Rabbi Gershom wrote this letter, he was writing it to people in France. Okay.
Right.
So the assumption, when people proffer this, well, Rabbi Gershom, he said, well, there's several things they don't understand about their own society. Number one, all rabbis would come together, or they would at least teach different things about practical things, which were already in Torah. Okay.
Mhm.
And the reason he wrote the letter and he told them in a nutshell that monogamy should be enacted is because at the time the French Jews were being persecuted. Okay. So practicing
It
your
was it
culture.
was a pragmatic step he was taking in order to prevent pogroms. It wasn't what
Correct.
scripture says. He was
Absolutely.
taking a pragmatic. In exactly the same letter, did he not also say that divorce was put on the table? Where prior to that, divorce was not something that was common or allowed, but that was
Oh, yes,
that
divorcing the wife, like an additional wife. Yes, absolutely. Which
yeah,
shows you that they were practicing polygamy. Like, I don't,
right.
they're already doing it.
And this
So
is this is 1020 CE or 1020 AD. So this is happening 1,000 years after
mhm.
Christianity allegedly began, or 1,000 years after the death of Yeshua. So, or the death and resurrection. So, yeah, I mean, it proves. And it wasn't until 1563 that the Roman Catholic Church formally outlawed polygyny at the Council of Trent. Prior to that, they're preaching against it. They're saying so, but it took them 1,500 years to come to a place that say, no, you're going to hell if you do that.
Yeah, and remember, most people in these European countries were not Catholic, even though the
Right.
country. Whenever people say a society it's a Catholic country, what they're actually saying is
The
the government.
government.
The government is that. Just like
Yes.
in China, there's a lot of religious people, but China is not religious.
Right.
Because the government is not religious.
Yeah.
So, going back to Gershon, so absolutely 110% on everything you said, but also we didn't have email. So when he wrote this letter, it wasn't disseminated to all Jews across all
Right.
eras, across the whole earth at the time,
Right.
because that type of communication was very limited.
Right.
So how am I supposed, if I'm a Kai Fang Jew from China, okay, there's you got hundreds of thousands of Kai. If I'm a Kai Fang Jew of China, okay, how am I supposed to get that letter? How would I know that polygamy is outlawed. Meanwhile, 100 years pass, me and my family members are polygamous.
Yeah.
What about B'nai Israel of India?
Right.
They were definitely practicing polygamy.
Or
Okay.
B'nai Menashe and B'nai Ephraim of Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Yes.
Or the
Yes.
Sephardim that were in Spain and then ultimately in
Right.
all of Central and South America.
Yes,
Yeah,
because they practice polygamy. What about the Mizrahi of North Africa
exactly.
and all the way to Spain and Morocco? But
Yeah.
they were practicing polygamy. When you go to Beta Israel has always practiced polygamy.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
My elder who trained me, I was trained for about 4 or 5 straight years on the language, customs, and culture. And my elder speaks, I think, 16 languages. He's been a professor in Europe, South America, and South America, and in I think in North Africa. I think he taught in North Africa. And he was telling me that the system of polygamy was very strict in Beta Israel.
Mm-hmm.
He said so all these this influx of Western and modern culture have sought to destroy that. But traditionally that's what we did. So when I the whole Gershom issue, because I've actually had a couple of debates with folks who are Ashkenazi, and ironically, these were black Ashkenazi Jews, and they were saying,
Mm-hmm.
well, you can't teach that because Rabbi Gershom said, I said, I find it funny that you all will uphold one rabbi automatically over another when it suits you, because Rabbi Gershom he was sending that letter to France,
Right.
to protect them. The same thing you said, to prevent pogroms, and that is practical. Like, he wasn't saying you're gonna burn in Sheol or you're gonna go to Sheol or something. He didn't say that. He just said, this is my advice based on an elder who's writing to people that I care about. That's normal.
He also said, if I remember correctly, and I could be wrong here, but I think he also said that the ruling was only good for 1,000 years.
Yes.
Now, recently there was some stuff coming out of Israel, rabbis saying, "Oh no, we've re-upped the ruling." But by definition, if you have a limit on how long the ruling lasts, then by definition, all you're doing is temporarily suspending the reality of polygyny as the legal deal.
Yes.
So yeah,
There's
you
a
can't
lot of
make this stuff up.
and see the people who comment otherwise, who are anti-polygamous, they believe in prescriptive monogamy.
Mm-hmm.
They don't. I was like, I know for me, my background is in literature, so like in history. So I study documents. When you study a primary document, you have to look at it for what it is. You can't say, oh, that was meant for, like, I wouldn't have had to write the polygamous papers if I was living in Benin, 1,500 years ago. I wouldn't have had to write it.
No,
I've even searched for worldwide. I've searched for anti-polygamous movements. I spent about 10 years searching. I would go to libraries and search. There's been no anti-polygamous movements until you saw the European slave trade. That was the time
or until you see Western Christianity with the Roman
yes,
Catholic mindset show up. That's
yes,
the point at which
yes,
it.
precisely.
And,
But they use,
what you don't see is you don't see books about or how to be or writings about how to be a polygynist, because that was common knowledge. It was the wisdom of the fathers. It's what you would get sitting around the fire, or while you're apprenticing, you would be hearing this. You would see it from the time that you're running around with nothing but the running around naked in the yard. Right.
Yeah, but see, that's why I started the manuscript Polygamy as Economic Warfare. That takes the polygamous papers, that's volume 2. That takes it and is showing people how to prepare. I even show parents how to identify young men when their son is coming up, because I was identified as a polygamist when I was a boy. My mom was like, "Hey, son," she's like, "you got all these girls around. They would come over to the house and they just wanted to be around." And she said, "That's leadership." She said, "They want you." She said, leadership is the first key. My mother taught me that. And I'm like, that's why Polygamy is Economic Warfare, that this book that I'm writing is important, because it's going to show us how to do it in real time. It's going to give us these additional perspectives that we're discussing. Like all the things you're saying, Pete, about the manipulation of data, and having access to certain the whole idea of transmission of knowledge is gone these days. And a lot of the children coming up don't want to hear it. I had a lot of knowledge transmitted to me so I could carry it to my cousins.
Right.
Like, for example, I was taught zoology. I was taught the earth sciences growing up. I was taught engineering by my grandfather, my paternal
Mm.
grandfather. That same grandfather taught one of my cousins mechanics. He showed him how to fix any and build everything, any and everything. He taught my other cousin, me and my two cousins were very close. He taught my other cousin weaponry and tactics because he fought in Japan. Was it Japan? Yeah, he fought in the Gilbert and the Mariana Islands. He was one of the Montfort Point Marines. If you all look up Montfort Point Marines, it was the first Black Marine regiment.
Mm.
My grandfather was a Montfort Point Marine, and
Cool. Wow.
three of his brothers died. He got injured. He came back. And he was the police chief of Royal Oak Township in Michigan. So
Mm.
I got all this combative DNA in me. It's very, and I'm bringing that to the table.
Sure.
So transmitting that knowledge to my cousin. He was an inventor also, and he was a home builder. He owned properties. Me and my cousins, we transmit that knowledge to our children. This is more than anything very important. We don't want to be a single generation group of scholars. That's not going to work. And
Right.
you mentioned earlier, Pete, about the trajectory you're going on, and then spreading that at the end of your road. When we pass away, we need that knowledge that's already multiplied 100 times.
Right.
See, and it actually helps the earth to keep functioning as a unit.
Right.
You can't function like that when men and women, we don't want to be householders anymore. We just don't want to do that. We just gonna
Right.
smash and dash.
Yeah.
we just gonna smash and dash. Let's just keep it like that. I'm like, that actually wastes your energy, it wastes your seed, and it wastes your time, and
And
therefore
it's very selfish.
it's very
It's
selfish.
incredibly selfish. It's all about me and what I can get out of this right now instead of
Yes,
building progeny, building future.
yes,
Um,
yes,
I believe we could talk for hours more. This really has been a fantastic conversation, and we definitely need to get together and talk some more.
yes,
Um, but I want to thank you, Brother Hondo, for the stand that you've taken. I want to thank you for being a lightning rod at points. I know what it feels like. I think we've stood in some of the same hilltops and collected the same lightning at points.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
one of the things that you are doing, one of the things that we are doing, one of the things that you are doing is you are helping to return to men and to return to mankind truths that are necessary for the survival of mankind that resists being dominated or resists being enslaved by the system.
mhm,
And so, yeah, as economic warfare, polygyny is a tool that allows men to grow and be strong and take dominion and to plant seed that will be, the upcoming generations.
yes,
Uh,
yeah,
and I thank you. I do. I thank you for your faithfulness to a difficult mission and a difficult topic, and for
absolutely.
walking it out. So
Well, I
I
appreciate you having. I appreciate you having me. I appreciate your time, and even to all your listeners, I appreciate them for I guess coming as the recorded version of this video and just spending time with us and watching it. Plus, you've done a lot of work in it too. I've read some of your writings online. In fact, the elder that introduced us, he sent me I think your webs I think your website, and he sent me I think one of your documents, and I had read some of your stuff before. Remember, I've known about you for years, so it was an honor to be here in a sort of have a discussion with somebody else who's knowledgeable about it.
Yeah, Natsab.com, there's actually a tab, a page that is dedicated just to biblical marriage and resources, and there are a whole bunch of resources on that page if somebody goes to this website right here. So yeah, I thank you. I would love to send you a copy of my book, Authority, Headship, and Family Structure According to Moses.
Please
If
do.
offline, if you can give me an address where I can send that, I will get a copy out to you. I
Absolutely.
sent my last one out yesterday, and I've got more on order coming, so I'll send you one just as soon as I get one. But
Yeah,
I
I
bless
would
you, brother.
appreciate that.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just saying thank you. I appreciate that. I'll definitely send that to you. Send you my email
I'd
address.
love to. So yeah, it's but what I want to do offline here is get your address, and then I can ship that to you as soon as I get some more of them in. But I bless you, brother, and I thank you so much. We are going to have you back on here because this has been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you.
Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And so for you guys out there, absolutely have thoroughly enjoyed having you. I'm gonna uh let Hondo hang for just a second here. I'm going to tell you guys that I appreciate you guys. I thank you for the journeys that you're on. I thank you for having the temerity and the spine to stand strong and to investigate the hard things that are out there. And for those who walk with me in terms of Kol Israel, for King and Kingdom, I bid you shalom.